Hello, and welcome to the Tuning In podcast. I'm Dana Evans, your inner voice and emotional support coach. In this podcast, we explore the deep wisdom that lives in our bodies, emotions, and inner voice. Together, we'll shed the layers that no longer serve us, creating space to tap into the flow of life and experience true ease. So, are you ready to join me? Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Tuning In podcast. So today we're talking about seasons and transitions, because what else would we be talking about? It is March, well, February 29th, but we are in March when you're receiving this episode. And depending on where you are, there might be some seasonal shifts. I am in New Mexico, and one thing that I've noticed is that the seasons change a little sooner than in Colorado. In fact, we're starting to get warmer days. This morning, I was literally sitting on the couch with my New Mexico bird book, with my binoculars, and watching as new birds are arriving at the bird feeder. We have a goldfinch. Oh my gosh, he's so cute. They're so tiny. And then there is a western bluebird, and that's along with the regular finches and birds and pigeons that have been coming. So you can start to see, of course, I always turn to nature to look for transitions. So we're seeing new birds arriving, and this literally just started this week, the last week of February. So new birds are arriving. I can now go back on my old walk. So the walk that I was doing every day all summer and fall, during the winter, it was too snow-packed and muddy and even icy to be able to walk on it. So I had to do a different path. But now that's started to dry up and I'm able to go on that. And on that walking path, I've noticed that the cacti have started to bloom. We have these, I need to look up the name of them, but they're these spindly, I think they're called like jumping cactus. They're these big, gnarly, spindly things. And apparently their little prongs will kind of jump and get you if you get too close to them. But they have these beautiful yellow flowers, and all of a sudden they started to bloom. There's some other little plants that kind of look like yucca or something like that. And they're starting to sprout new green from the center. They start sprouting in the center, and these little prongs, they're sharp, start rising, and then they start to bloom out. So they've started, the temperature started to shift. It also started to get windy. And guess what? I found myself hit this week, yesterday, with allergies. The first time I came to visit New Mexico was in March. And oh my gosh, it was right after I'd been in Sedona in January. And Sedona is going to bloom a little earlier than New Mexico, which is earlier than Colorado. And I had just died from allergies in Sedona. And then I came to New Mexico and died again from the same allergies. And this year, I've already, my voice, I think, even sounds a little congested, sneezing, oh my gosh, runny nose. And that came with the wind this week. So the wind is such a sign of spring for me, but also such a sign of transition and movement and shifts. So that's what we've really been seeing in New Mexico this week. And it is different than Colorado. So Colorado, in fact, John is in Colorado right now. He spent the week there for a conference, and he's like, it's cold and snowy there. And I remember February and March in Colorado were always the hardest for me because I'm energetically ready for spring, but nature is not. In fact, Colorado gets a ton of spring snowstorms, like a lot. And they've been known to get snow even in May, but March was always the hardest. And so I saw some videos on Instagram of Colorado and snow, and I'm sitting here looking at sun and blue sky. Look, I don't know if this is going to last. This is my first spring in New Mexico, but I am here for some warmth and these visual cues of a change of season that are on the way. I can see little buds on the trees. So yeah, it's all happening about 2 months earlier than it does in Colorado, which is so interesting and so beautiful to watch and to understand and like to be so close to the land. I walk every day, almost every day, and to see the shifts, it's really fun. It's such a dense experience. There's just so much to watch and witness. And I'm sure wherever you are, you're also getting to see that as well. So wherever you're at in this, there's a couple things that we do know. One, if you're in a state that does change of time here, that's happening on March 10th. So that means that the days are getting even longer. Right now, for us, it's about 12 hours of light. So it's getting light around 6:30 is when the sun is rising. And then the sun is setting, about finishing setting around like 6:15. So we're getting like that really balanced 12 hours of light. And once the time change, it'll be darker in the morning and it'll be light a little bit later. So that's always a big sign of transition because you're coming out of that darkness of the winter. I will say, in talking about nature and those natural transitions, my cat is also, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but she's adapting too. And she's waking up earlier because the sun, it's lighter earlier, right? So we have all of these cues, both physical, energetic, visual, temperature cues that are telling us there is a change upon us. It is coming. And even if I have a client who's in Sweden. Hello. Even if you're in Sweden, I know that these shifts are coming. And sometimes, even if you don't see it yet in the world, in your physical 3D world around you in nature, you can feel it in your body. And that's actually what is starting this conversation today. Last weekend, I really started to feel like, okay, there's a shift coming and it's asking me to make some personal shifts. What does that mean? Well, my body was like, okay, Dana, it's time to release coffee. I've talked about this so many times, but coffee is this thing that I go in and out of drinking. And sometimes I drink a lot, sometimes I drink a little, sometimes I drink none. And I used to do this mentally. I used to do this and be like, I have to stop drinking coffee because coffee's bad, right? In the moment, I've decided coffee's bad. And therefore, I need to stop drinking it because if coffee's bad, then I'm bad for drinking it, right? It was very authoritarian. And then I would do a cleanse and force myself to stop. And it's a whole thing. I have a long sordid history with coffee. But the way I deal with it now is I pay attention to my body. And I kid you not, when it's time to start releasing coffee, a few things happen. One, I'm feeling really overstimulated, even by a small amount. Two, it isn't tasting as good as it had in the past. And three, I'm noticing some major energy things when I have coffee. So what I was reflecting on this weekend was, oh my gosh, recently I've been waking up feeling pretty good. I've been having pretty good energy in the mornings. But what happens is then I drink coffee. I probably have like 4 to 6 ounces right now, or I was having like 4 to 6 ounces at the time. I drink the coffee and it would be like, and I'd feel too good, as in it would take a good thing and it would like throw gas on the fire and it would be like, and it would be this big flare. And then I'd be like, I have all these things to say, send all these voicemails in the morning. I go on my walk. And then it's like 11, 12, 1 o'clock. All of a sudden it's like crash. All the energy is gone. And what was happening was I wasn't getting anything done. I had all this energy, but it was too much to deal with. And so I'd like spew it out. I would send a shit ton of voice memos, go on my walk, and then slump. So the energy itself was unsustainable and it wasn't supportive, right? It was taking something. I already had energy. I was already feeling good in the morning, but then it was making it so intense that then I couldn't deal with it. It's like I was spinning in circles, right? It wasn't going anywhere. So that was one really clear thing. And two, it legit wasn't tasting as good. I was like, man, I miss the days when coffee tastes delicious. And so those are the signs for me that I was like, okay, it's time to cut out coffee. Like simple, right? This time it wasn't so simple. My mind was so resistant. My mind was like, okay, we're going to phase out, which is fine. I love phasing out of things. There's a time to just cut things out and be like, okay, I'm done. Draw a line in the sand, set a boundary, remove that decision. Like that can be really, really freeing to say, okay, I'm done. And then there's times when it feels better to phase out and it feels like that's going to be more supportive to your system. I've done both with coffee. You just kind of have to listen and attune to what you need. But this time I'm like, I'm going to phase out. I'm not drinking a ton, so I'm going to phase down. So cutting down, first it was to 4 ounces. And I have the cutest little coffee espresso cup, and it's a 2-ounce cup. So it's really easy to measure. So I'm like, okay, I'm only going to have 2 of those a day. Then this started, I guess it kind of started last week. And then this week I was like way down. So Monday and Tuesday I had 1, but they were half calf because we were out of coffee. John was out of town and I'm like, perfect. I'm not going to buy coffee beans. I'm not going to make coffee. But we have these little coffee pods. By the way, the brand is Comateer. I'll put it in the show notes. This is a total plug. I am obsessed with Comateer coffee pods. They're frozen coffee concentrates from some of the best coffee brands out there. It's unbelievably delicious. You can get decaf, you can get half calf, you can get full calf. And I love having them in the freezer. Like if you have to leave early one day or go to the airport, or you just want like a little bit of coffee and you don't want to make a whole pot, these are the thing. John took them on his trip so that he has good coffee when he's at the hotel. Like we are obsessed with Comateer. I think I have a code. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but like I'm so obsessed with Comateer. I think I have a code that gives you like $25 off your first order, but they are so useful to have on hand or like if you run out of coffee. And it's delicious. I know people think about like freeze-dried coffee and they're like, ugh. I'm like, no, this is the best. I use the decaf pods to make when I want coffee but no caffeine. I just always have them around. Anyway, total side note, but I was drinking Comateer half calf Monday and Tuesday. So I was having 1 cup, but it was half calf, 1 2-ounce thing of half calf. Today, I was like, okay, Dana, you've done a great job. I've dragged this out over almost 2 weeks, and I was only drinking 4 to 6 ounces of coffee, and I have really dragged it out, and it is time to stop. So this morning, I had a Pura, P-U-RH or something, tea from Peak Tea, another brand I freaking love. I have their matcha. I have their tea. I bought their new coffee replacement that hasn't arrived yet that has cacao and some green tea. I'll put a link for them too. Like I also have their vitamin C and elderberry packets, which I use if I'm feeling sick. I love their hyaluronic acid hydration packs as well. Seriously, you guys know when I like love a brand, I love a brand and I want to tell you about it. So I'll put the links for Comateer and Peak Tea if you're interested, but I'm obsessed with both of those. So I had that today and I just had to like stop dragging my feet and draw a hard line because I could drag out this coffee thing for so long. And ultimately, it was becoming like a drain because I'm negotiating how much coffee I can have. And I'm like, okay, we're done. Time for a tea. Because it's not really about the caffeine, it's about the source of caffeine. When I have this Para tea, it's delicious. I quite love it. It's like robust and has this delicious flavor. But the caffeine level is so different. I only have 1 cup because it's like a single packet. They're like freeze-dried teas. They're so crazy good. And it has L-theanine and it's fermented, so it's supportive of the gut. So it's just a completely different experience. So now I'm recording this. I feel a little foggy. I have to be honest, even without that tiny bit of caffeine, I feel a little foggy, a little thick-headed, but also like relieved because I said, okay, I'm done. I made that decision. And that was a long story. Sorry. Thank you for listening. I like to tell the nitty gritty. I am someone who loves the nitty gritty. Like I want to know the details. I don't want to just hear like, oh, I'm done with caffeine. I'm like, how did it feel? What was your experience? How did you go about doing that? How did it work for you? What have you done in the past? That is what I like. So that's what I like to share with you all as well. So the point of all of this is that as we're approaching a change in season, now is a really good time to evaluate what's going on in your life. What are my habits? What are my routines? What are my practices? What are my rituals? What is working and what isn't? And let me tell you, I love a routine. My morning routine is so freaking set. And my cat, like if anyone has a cat, and probably dogs, I don't know, but like she loves a routine. She knows the second I start pouring my morning tonic, which is often lemon water or like apple cider vinegar, cinnamon, ginger, she goes to sit on her crunchy paper, like paper bags. That's like her favorite playpen. And she starts crying because that's the time, once I've done my morning things, I've unloaded the dishwasher, I've gotten her raw food. Well, now that it's spring, she wants raw food again. And then it's like, once I get my lemon water, then she gets brushed. We love routines. My morning routine, though, was so set. That's part of why the coffee was so hard to release. So a good routine will keep you on track. And also, if you want to change something in the routine, I'm just going to like put that out there. It can be really hard. All of last week, every day, I'm like, I'm not going to make coffee. I'm not going to make coffee. I'm not going to make coffee. Making coffee is part of my morning routine. And when I make coffee, I want the benefit of having made it. I want the fruits of my labor. I want to drink the coffee that I made, right? It's so funny. But it's so ingrained. Just do it, just do it, just do it. So it worked out that like I was fighting with reducing coffee last week because I was making it every day. So it worked out that we ran out of beans and John went out of town because let me tell you, if you live with someone, routines are doubly hard to break. Him being gone has allowed me to be like, okay, I get to make this change. And it also has allowed me to really reflect personally, like, okay, what is the rhythm and routine that I want for myself? And it's so much easier for me to recognize that when I'm in my own energy and when there's not another person in the house to address, right? To acknowledge, to deal with. So this has been so perfect. So you get to ask yourself, with this shift that's coming, what are you noticing in your body? Are foods tasting different? Are drinks tasting different? And this can happen on a macro and a micro level. For example, once I moved to Santa Fe, the scent that I was using in Colorado no longer felt good. I was big into Palo Santo. I have like a perfume oil that I use that's Palo Santo. I have the sticks, I have sprays. Like I loved it. It smelled so good. It was so grounding in our house in Arvada. Coming here, every time I try to light Palo Santo or even put on the perfume, it's like, ugh, it's not working, right? So that's on like a bigger picture of like the smell that is required here is different. We're simmering pinyon, pine cones, and juniper berries in a pot. That's the main source of scent, along with the emotional edit spray, which has mugwort and some other beautiful lavender. Rosemary is smelling really good here. Pine is smelling really good. We burn pinyon incense. We're simmering the pinyon pine cones. So it's like our house and the energy of the house required a different scent. I literally bought John a cologne that's made locally by harvested, I'm not kidding, guys. Like, what? It's harvested locally of all sorts of stuff in New Mexico, like sagebrush, pinyon, resins. And it's called The Scent of New Mexico in the Fall. And I bought him that cologne for Christmas and I use it too. And I spray it on and I'm like, yes, this is the smell of our house, right? So you'll notice whenever there's a period of transition, you're going to be asked to evaluate. The other thing that happened once we moved here is my alcohol consumption has dramatically decreased and it just keeps decreasing and my interest in alcohol like disappeared. It's the weirdest thing. Yes, I still get a drink. Yes, if we're out, I'll go get a beer or have a taster or have a cocktail, but I'm not as interested in it. And at home, both John and I have essentially like stopped drinking at home. I'll make mocktails. The best thing that tastes the most delicious to me anymore is pure tart cranberry juice, which by the way is so good for you, and tonic water. And I use Betty Buzz tonic water. It's my favorite, hands down, no question. I love Betty Buzz. And that to me tastes better than like any beer, any wine, any cocktail. And it's so interesting to watch as in the transition to a new state, how my relationship with something like alcohol changed so drastically. And it wasn't mental. And that's what I'm trying to always instill and reinforce is yes, there is a time and place for mental changes. If you know that something's out of control in your life, you know, whether it's your social media use, your alcohol use, your eating habits, your gossip habits, whatever, right? If you know that there's something out of control, like, yes, there is a time and place to say, okay, we're going to stop this. Like, we need to reevaluate. We need to assess. And then there's also the beautiful unfolding and letting yourself be shown what is ready to shift, right? I don't even think about having a drink anymore. And it's so interesting. And this is the season, this is the transition, and it feels really good. And it's not a negotiation with my brain. I haven't decided it. My body's like, it's not a thing. I'm like, okay, cool. And if I have a drink, I have a drink, but mostly I don't. And there's freedom in letting things happen. And the coffee too. It's like, okay, this is clearly, mind was a lot more attached to coffee, but like, this is clearly like not working for me right now. So I get to release it. And you get to look at your routines and your rituals as the season is changing is what are you being called to do now? Maybe you're being called to walk at a different time or sleep a little bit later, right? I'm going to bed a little bit later now, right? I'm waking up a little bit earlier. And what if you're flexible enough to let your routine shift when it's time? And to really evaluate and inquire these parts of your life to say, does this still work? Is this still serving the purpose? So now, right now, this week and next week, like the next couple of weeks are a really good time to evaluate, take stock of what's working and what's not. And I actually had this conversation with a client too of it doesn't even have to be physical things. I said to her, I'm like, well, what if the expectations that you have of yourself aren't working in this season, right? What if you need to lower the expectations of what you're putting on yourself during a difficult time? And also maybe in a separate situation, maybe your situation, who's ever listening, maybe you need to raise your expectations. In fact, I'm more in that state where I'm like, I need to raise my expectations that I have for myself. I need to raise the expectations of what I want myself to do because I'm in a more forward momentum time and I want to capitalize on that. And I need to push myself a little bit. So this is what I'm saying. There is so much that you can look at and evaluate. Spend the next couple of weeks doing that. And then either at the time change or at the equinox, the spring equinox on, I think it's the 21st. It usually is around then. That's going to be the time for you to really start implementing and give yourself space, right? You don't have to force anything. It doesn't have to be fast, but check in with your body, with your inner voice. It's like, what is going to work for me as I step into this new season? What is going to support me in this new season? What am I being called to release in this new season? What am I being called to embrace? Who is calling me forward? What is calling me forward? What energy is being asked of me? And listen. And then I just want to end this with the idea that I talk about listening to the body all the time. And I think my story of the coffee is a good example of, and it's not always easy, right? There is going to be resistance. Not always. Like for me with the alcohol, surprisingly, honestly, really surprisingly, there wasn't resistance to, it moving out of my life. Coffee, there's resistance. You might have resistance to people moving out of your life. You might have resistance to emotions moving out of your life. So there is the knowing, the clarity of, okay, this is what is needed and this is what is not needed. And then there's the actual implementation. And so be gentle with yourselves. Please be gentle with yourselves always. And take no shit, right? Like I did have to put my foot down with my mind and be like, listen, we have to stop the coffee. This is draining us. Enough. And you might have to do that as well. It was like, just one more day, just one more day, just one more day. But ultimately, it's dragging out and keeping you from what is possible on the other side of this shift. So notice the negotiation, notice the fight, notice the resistance. And you're going to have to ask yourself this question. You're going to come to a head where it's like, how much longer am I willing to hold on to the old thing that I now know is no longer serving, and drop in, take the leap of faith, surrender whatever it is to what I'm being called toward, to the new thing. And sometimes you don't know what's on the other side. I knew what was on the other side of coffee. I had this Pura tea that I love. And then I literally, after I made that decision, I had gotten an email from Peak Tea that was like, here's our new coffee replacement. I was like, perfect, ordered, right? I knew it was on the other side. But sometimes when it comes to releasing an old emotion that just keeps showing up, you don't know what's on the other side. You don't know what is going to come up and come through when you finally say, okay, I'm going to go there and release. But are you willing to trust your body enough to trust that like it's only showing me this because it's time, because it's ready, because it's safe for something to shift? Or are you going to fight and hold on and grip and scream and cry and kick and say, no, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to? That's a journey as well. But I promise you, I have experienced this so many times, whether it's a relationship to a food, a relationship to a drink, a relationship to the way you work, whatever it is. Once you know that it is no longer for you, holding on becomes harder and harder and honestly more and more painful. And we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of the pain on the other side. I know that. But there's going to be a point where the pain of holding on is greater than the pain of letting go. And you can choose to get to that point where you're either forced by intervention, right? The universe may interfere, or nature may interfere, or God may interfere. Or you can say, I know what I'm being called to do. I know what's needed of me right now and what's not, and I'm willing to go there now. And honestly, it's going to be the less painful path. It's okay if you choose the more painful path. But just know that it does get harder and harder to hold on to what you know deep down is not for you. I just feel, please know, like I say this with such compassion. I've seen this in so many clients. I've seen this within myself. Oh my gosh, like the fight and the frustration, getting fed up with yourself. And at some point you have to be like, I'm done. I'm done. Whew, I just got dizzy from saying that. Deep breath in. Release it, release it, release it. So that is what I wanted to talk about today. Oh, and just to bring it together, I mentioned my cat. Again, animals in nature are really good for us to watch. So she's in a transition right now. And this week we've kind of honed in on it. But she was like waking me up at like 4 a.m. And she wakes me up, she licks my arm. And then, I'd wake up, she'd crawl under the covers, then she'd get up. Like she's not in the winter anymore. In the winter, she was getting into bed with me at 7:30. Crawling under the covers and legit sleeping with me until like 7:30 in the morning. Like she would just sleep through the night. So good. Now we're hitting this transition period, right? We're not in spring yet. We're not in, winter's moving out. And it's like, oh, what do I need? So she tries to get under the covers, but it's not so cold anymore. And so then she gets out and then the birds are chirping earlier and we have these bird feeders and she's like, and then the sun's coming up earlier. So then at 6, she comes in and meows and it's like, she's changing. Now she wants raw food again. So I'm feeding her raw food morning and night and she's eating all of it, which is unbelievable. So great. And she's wanting different playtime. I am not kidding. She wants different playtime now. And she's sleeping in different places. Like, we can literally watch our animals who are so habitual and routined, watch them change their routines and watch them like it's an uncomfortable middle because we're not here, we're not there. And if we get stuck in the uncomfortable middle, it goes from limbo to purgatory. So we don't want to get trapped here. We want to keep moving. We want to let the routine shift. We want to let the things go. We want to let the wind blow and take us where we need to go. That's the power of the transitional time. That is the power of the in-between. It is change making and it's uncomfortable, but I promise you it is more comfortable than if you hold it and you try to make everything static from season to season. We have to be more fluid in our physical bodies, in our mental mindset, right? In our routines and our structures, adding and allowing for fluidity is what's going to allow us to move and shift and be resilient, right? It's like if you trip, you don't fall and crash and stay down, you bounce back up. And so remember that this is part of you, and change and shifts are so valuable, and they're preparing you for what's next. So with that, I have another new change. I've met a friend on my street. She is also a Pisces. She's a therapist, and we have run into each other twice now on our walks, on two totally different walks at two totally different times, going opposite directions. So it was like such divine timing that we ran into each other. One was last week and one was yesterday. So yesterday we ran into each other and she's like, let's walk together. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm going to walk with her here in an hour, and we are going to walk together. And this is very new with me. I've never had someone that I go on a walk with. It's always been a solo time for me. So I'm going to walk with her and her dog and embrace something new and try something new and see where that takes me with a new person. So many fun things are possible. I'm holding the light for you. Know that spring itself is a transition from winter to summer, right? It's such a transitional time, but the transition from winter to spring can be really difficult because there's so much moving, and wind to me is just such a metaphor for this transition. So know that I'm holding the light for you. I am holding the grounding, anchored energy for you, and I'm holding the potential for something new to bloom. All right, sending you lots of love. As always, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining me in another episode of the Tuning In podcast. If you loved this episode, please rate and review it or share it with a friend. If you want to go deeper into the realm of emotions and learn the language of your body, check out my audio course, Emotions Decoded, at alignful.com/audio. As always, you can follow along with my journey on Instagram at Dana_Evans. See you next week.